A Necessary Death, why a mockumentary about suicide?
Well, we shot A Necessary Death in 2004, so that was before the big wave of fake documentaries. And we just came out of film school. Zoltan Hanti, our cinematographer, and Shil Pasai, my editor, we had done all our student films together. So we wanted to shoot our first feature right after film school. And we didn't want to wait, because a lot of people, are kind of writing and developing and fundraising and are always hoping that someone will give them millions suddenly to shoot that film. And we didn't want to fall into that trap to never shoot anything again, because we were developing stuff for 8 to 10 years. We just wanted to go. And we didn't have a script and we didn't have any money. So we thought it was this really smart idea to shoot it in the fake documentary style and not light anything. Just get a really cheap camera that one of our actors had, just borrow that and just start shooting, just to keep the momentum up and then develop the story while we were shooting. So that's where the style came from. And then we kind of engineered it backwards, that we were first saying, what do we have access to, what can we shoot that is not going to look cheap? So then we had our style, and then we needed a story that would actually fit with that style. So we couldn't really shoot in outer space or Western or some period piece, so that kind of defined the story we were then developing.
What is it about suicide, such a taboo topic to some people, that maybe has been a little more trendier now, especially in light of bullying and all that? But what was it about suicide that you wanted to explore?
I think it was Necessary Death to me is not even so much about suicide, it's more about the ambition of the people that follow the suicidal guy. If you wanted to make a movie that really focuses on the issue of suicide, I think you would take someone who's making a choice and doesn't have a brain tumor. In our case, the guy we're following has a brain tumor and is going to die anyway. And we did that on purpose so that we wouldn't actually get into the whole philosophical, moral, ethical issues so much, but we could, because you would have to shoot a 10-hour movie or something to kind of explore that and do that justice. But we wanted to explore the ambition of the filmmaker. And in order to do that, I think you have to deal, in our case, we wanted to deal with the life and death situation. So it wasn't so much the fascination with suicide, rather than someone who is facing that dilemma and is so vulnerable, because you can manipulate him as the filmmaker, as the documentarian. You can manipulate him into the one direction or the other direction. And then the group, the documentary team, actually falling apart and going to war with each other. That was kind of our focus. But it just was important that the stakes were high enough for that, and suicide worked well within that.
I see, fit into that. Well, I want to read part of your article on filmcourage.com, and you mentioned, I had been invited to sit on the jury of the Skena Up Festival in Kosovo, and some of the most incredible days of my life, so happy at times, and one of the evenings had been set aside for the jury members to screen their projects. You write, my colleagues' films had been met with standing ovations, and I am of course ready for mine. The last shot, fade to black, and nothing, complete silence. And then what happens in the theater?
Well, I got up because I was gonna do the Q&A, and I just couldn't understand why there was complete silence. It didn't process it in that moment. And I'm walking down the stairs, and it's still dark, and I'm hearing from underneath me, and I'm looking down, and there's a girl who's actually lying in the aisle, and she's twitching and she's crying, and her neighbor, the guy who was sitting next to her, had his face in his hands and was rocking back and forth like this, and the tears were running down his forearms. And I'm turning around, and it was just a weird atmosphere in the room, because you have a feeling for how an audience moves after a movie. There's this steady flow to the exit, and it was completely the opposite. People were walking into all directions, and they were either too fast or too slow, and it was just weird. And I'm looking around, and there are these aisles, these little islands of people that are gathering around their friends and pulling them to their feet and talking to them. And it was this complete emergency situation. And that's when I realized they didn't understand that it wasn't a real documentary. They thought we had just killed someone on screen that they had been falling in love with over 90 minutes, and then we killed them off. They were reacting to that. And I was running around as if I'm doing first aid, and I was telling people this was not real. They were actors. The guy who killed himself was an actor. And they were so, they were so not grasping it, that even when I said that, one girl, she was crying, and she said, he was an actor? Did the documentarian know? And I was like, no, the documentarian was an actor too. You know, everyone you saw on the screen was. But they were just so impacted by that experience. And I always thought if you can evoke emotions that strong from an audience, that alone is a great thing. I was kind of waiting for my Oscar. I was like, isn't this great? You know? And they didn't think it was great, you know, and they all had the same question. They were all asking why? What are you trying to do? Why did you do this to us? You know, it was as if I had dropped this bomb on this audience, and now they wanted to know what they should have learned and what they were supposed to take away from it, and I didn't have an answer. And it was the worst feeling in the world, you know, because I was kind of responsible for it, and there was no glory in that. You know, I had never actually thought that through. And I called the rest of the team in Los Angeles and said, we have to recut this movie, and I told them what just happened, and they didn't get it. They said, isn't that what we've been working on for 4 years, you know, to create an experience that is so authentic and feels so real that you actually fall for it? And I said, but that's not enough. We need this answer, which I would never have believed before I saw that scene. I would always have thought it's enough to create emotional turmoil and let the audience figure out those questions themselves. You know, I don't have to give the answers. And this whole there's responsibility in filmmaking, I always thought that was kind of, you know, pseudo-intellectual blah blah. But when I saw that in action, how much they were in need of an answer, you know, and of closure somehow that I couldn't provide, it just didn't feel good. And then we did recut the ending, and interestingly enough, we had an alternative ending, alternate ending that we had shot already, where one more person dies. The ending that we have in the movie right now, without giving anything away, but 2 people die instead of 1. And for some reason, the audience seems to be much more okay with that, because there is some feeling of justice. You know, the bad guy, the guy that had manipulated person A into suicide and now was getting some kind of punishment, and suddenly it didn't weigh so heavily anymore, apparently. What the audience couldn't deal with is that there's this guy that they love and he's being manipulated into killing himself, and he kills himself and the movie is over. They needed that little bit of artifice, that little bit of Hollywood twist ending, where it's like, oh, right before he dies he's actually standing up for himself and for the woman that he loves one last time, and actually commits this horrific act, you know, but he's not just a simple victim anymore. And that went down much better with the audience, so we kind of tamed that down a little bit.